Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to talk about why language is vague, why there are fuzzy regions between every concept and the opposite of that concept. This has come up in substantive terms, in terms of Science Moment things concerning abortion, concerning a recent Science Moment episode on sex and male-female differences, but it's about everything. It's about what distinguishes between shirts and things that are sweaters and shirts, let's say, or between stools and chairs, or between dogs and cats. All natural language words have unclear or vague meanings. And it is not a, one view could be, this is some kind of problem with language that we end up with. If we were just more mathematical or more careful or more rational a species, we'd end up with language such that where each word has a determinate meaning, just like, the prime number has a determinate meaning. There are no in-between cases. Now, I've hinted many times in previous videos that this is not some accidental quirk of concerning the nature of humans. In fact, the reason that it's like this follows from some rich but simple kind of mathematical concepts in computer science. So the story that I'm going to quickly tell you here is that even if we were much more powerful computational machines, 1,000 times bigger brains, a million gazillion times bigger brains, we would still have concepts that are vague. That is, and what do I mean by vague? I mean that if I have a word for, I've got pillow, it applies to some things that are pillows, and then there are things that are not pillows, which applies to a bunch of things. And there's a whole bunch of things in the middle that are not clearly pillows and not clearly not pillows. And in fact, where the lines are as to where pillow ends and this gray area begins is unclear. And where the gray area ends and this sort of not pillows, clearly not pillows, is also unclear. So this kind of fuzziness or gray areas, or vagueness as we sometimes call it, is inevitable for any kind of computational thinking machines, no matter where they crop up. And this is also related to the Sorites paradox, the heap paradox, which we've talked about before. This heap paradox is that, hey, one grain of sand does not make a heap. You nod your head. Well, and if there is n grains of sand and they don't make a heap, then n plus 1 grains of sand don't make a heap, which seems like a pretty obvious inductive step. You can't have suddenly one new grain of sand will suddenly allow you to make a heap when you couldn't before. The problem is that it follows from that there are no heaps. And this is, again, related to this fact that there are always gray areas or vagueness between each side of concepts. So why is it that this is inevitable? So in computer science, there's something called a program, algorithms. When you write a program, you'd like to have a program for pillow or for cat or for chair or for any kind of thing. You'd like to have a program in your head so that when you run it on some particular thing as input, and you can start running, okay, is this a pillow or it's not a pillow? What you'd like is that it just says, yes, it's a pillow, or no, it's not a pillow. That would be great. So you can imagine for any object in the entire universe, it'll just answer, yes, it's a pillow, or not. It's not a pillow. But the problem is, amongst all of the programs that computable things can compute, that is, computational devices can compute, including us, there are kinds of things that we can compute that don't always halt. That is, you can run them, and very often they're doing perfectly good, powerful things, but suddenly there are certain inputs where it just fails to halt altogether. It just keeps running and running and running. And what you'd like is to be able to have a program that looks at other programs and says, are there any holes in these programs? That is, they keep running and running. We want to make sure there's no holes. We want to make sure they always halt. Otherwise, you're working on something, or the secretary or somebody, is working on the program, the software that you've built, and they're kind of just waiting. Is this gonna, or it just hangs, right? A real live hang, it's never gonna stop computing because it got into an infinite loop of some kind. Now, it turns out there is no program that can look at other programs and say, hey, it's got holes in it. It's got these unhalting infinite loop parts within it. There is no such program that can always do this. So amongst the bucket of all possible programs that we computing machines can compute. There is a tiny little sub-bucket. One of these is called the primitive recursive functions, where within this little subclass, you can be sure that whatever program you pick within this primitive recursive bag, you can be sure that it will always output, yes, it's a pillow, or no, it's not a pillow, or for whatever thing you're using it for. The problem is with this little bag is really not rich. It doesn't at all utilize the full range of computational powers we computational machines can access. And the range that we have available to us is all of the programs, not just these primitive recursive programs, which is sort of a tiny little subset in some intuitive sense. So what you want all of the programs. You want the full richness available so you can start carving up the world in the ways that you need to. But the problem is that you may end up with a program that's intended for bald or pillow, just to stick with pillow because there's a pillow over here, that occasionally you're waiting for it to halt and say yes, or halt and say no, but it just doesn't halt. It just keeps going and going, right? Unfortunately, that's what you'll sometimes get. So it's inevitable that if you want to have rich concepts that actually help you carve up the world richly, the way the real world is, you'll end up with holes in your concepts. The programs that you use to tell you which things are pillows and which things aren't will suddenly have holes in them. Those suddenly not answer you. Now, there's going to be some potential regions of pillowiness, pillowy things or not pillowy things in the world. There are certain kinds of things that you're going to try to input that may take a long time before they halt, and maybe you'll just eventually give up and say, well, I think that was a part that was just never going to halt, but maybe you were wrong. So not only are there holes, which are like gray areas between the yes and the no, because you're not sure whether they're yes or no, but where these holes begin and end, you can't be perfectly certain, because you can't be certain when something is going to never halt. You'd have to wait forever to find out. So if there are regions, there's things in the world that suddenly don't say yes and don't say no, and in fact just run forever, you're not going to be exactly sure which things are in that region. Because there are some things that are potentially are yes cases, but they just take a million years for the thing to finally say yes. Or there are not clear, but there are definite no cases where it would, were you to be sufficiently patient, halt and say no, but you're not sufficiently patient to wait that long, so you just give up and say, I guess it's a gray area. Not only are there necessarily holes in your concepts or holes in the programs that you use for your concepts, but they're unseeable boundaries. You can't exactly see where they are and where they start and where they end. This is a mathematical necessity for any computational creature that wants to have the full richness available to carve up the world. Now, there's a richer, much richer story. There's a 50-page or some paper in Synthesa, a philosophy journal that I published almost 30 years ago. And chapter 3 or 4 of my first book, The Brain from 25,000 Feet, covers this in detail. There's many wrinkles and interesting aspects to this, but that's sort of the shortest version of it. If you are a finite computational creature of any kind and want the full range of resources to carve up the world, you inevitably have gray areas, unseeable holes between the definitely yes cases and the definitely no cases. This is true for pillows, for shirts, for chairs, for dogs and cats, for men and women, for when something turns from a fetus into a human life that's worth violating civil liberties of adults for. All of these things, whether they're politically interesting or mundane, suffer from this. The only things that don't are certain kinds of mathematical concepts, which are in some sense the least interesting. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, you can check out The Brain from 25,000 Feet. Because it costs you $250 at Amazon, if you poke around my website, changizi.com, you can find various chapters from it available for free. That was your science moment.